It's so weird. What are you talking about? Wait, don't even. All right, we're live, and
great way to start every time.
Yeah, we're awesome. Anyway, so we're here, and we're it's kind of, I guess, an emergency. This wasn't scheduled at all, but we figure since such a big event happened in terms of bringing, I guess, unification for the Korean Peninsula, I thought it would be a pretty good time to talk to Kyle of Foreign Policy Focus. And I can let Kyle kind of introduce himself to kind of have people know who he is a little bit more than that. So Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm the host of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast that can be found at libertarianinstitute.org. And there's a section for the show right on the homepage, as well as my daily news roundup that I put out there. And then I also have my own news website, immersionnews.com. And I'm constantly posting links up there to all the latest, mostly foreign policy, but, stuff that libertarians care about at home as well on that site. So immersionnews.com, libertarianinstitute.org are the easiest places to go to find my work.
Nice. How long have you been doing this for?
The news roundup actually just passed the second year Monday, I believe. And then the podcast has been around for like a year and 3 months now. I just recorded episodes 206. That'll be out tomorrow morning. Will Porter's the guest talking about the North Korea situation. And then episode 207 with Brian Sadie, who is an author and has done a lot of good work on the drug war and cartels and organized crime. And we talked about Colombia and the peace process for the FARC. So that there was a long-term, like 50-year long civil war there, and we kind of get into it because, as much as libertarians don't know about like the Middle East wars, they really have no idea most of the time about the interventions going on in South America and Central America, and that includes myself. So got Brian on the show to educate me a little bit.
Yeah. I feel like libertarians, or at least people in that realm of the political spectrum, I feel like they're more inclined to want to learn about things and not just, go along a line or something like, oh, so my people are going this way. Okay, I'll go that way too. Because, I mean, Dave Smith on his podcast recently was talking about abortion and how he disagreed with Murray Rothbard. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, he's so consistent that he disagrees with Murray.
Yeah. But anyway, we're getting off topic. So anyway, with the Korean, summit that happened with Kim Jong-un and President Trump, I think there's a lot of, at least for my initial thoughts, I'm like, this is great. Like at least they're meeting. Say if it's taken at face value, oh, this is a photo op, whatever, that's fine. If that means no nuclear warheads are going to be shot off and any chance of people dying, then, that's what we need. We don't want any more bloodshed because this Korean War has been going on for, more than 50 years now. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, I'm pro summit. I was happy that the summit happened. I think it's a good thing. I think it's even a better thing that Donald Trump didn't walk out in the first 30 seconds like he was telling the media at the G7 press conference that he might. So, as far as it goes, I think it went well. I think the advantages is that, you talk about this war going on for 50 plus years. I think the armistice was signed in 1953. So, during that time, it hasn't been like, there's Americans shooting at North Koreans the entire time, or, even South Koreans shooting at North Koreans. But especially since 2002, when John Bolton really along with Dick Cheney, really wrecked the agreed framework, which was the nuclear deal the United States signed with North Korea during the Clinton administration, and basically sent North Korea on a path to make nuclear weapons, and leading all the way up to Fire and Fury last year by Donald Trump. Of course, the Obama administration was just pretty much him saying, we won't negotiate with the North Koreans till they give up all their nuclear weapons. And the North Koreans saying, well, we're not going to give up our nuclear weapons till you talk to us. And so, it just kind of continues and gets worse and worse through the Obama administration. But this is, a complete change in pace. We went from, as I said, Fire and Fury to now Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump are shaking hands and smiling together. And, that this is absolutely not a bad thing.
So what do you think changed all that? What do you think there was like a specific moment or anything that Trump said or any particular issue or event that happened that you think maybe changed either party's minds?
So I guess to start, I think Donald Trump would say that was his maximum pressure campaign. And this was basically all the UN sanctions against North Korea, and as well as him getting President Xi of China to crack down on the North Korean smuggling going in and out between North Korea and China. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's like, a lot of factors going on here. One of those being that the North Koreans had demonstrated that they can launch an ICBM, and even if it wasn't necessarily accurate, get it pretty close to the United States. They demonstrated that they could ignite a very large atomic weapon and possibly a hydrogen weapon. And they at least said that they could miniaturize a nuclear, atom bomb and put it on an ICBM and launch that towards the United States. I think, North Korea demonstrated that they have a sufficient nuclear deterrent to ward off the United States. This is combined with last October, South Korea's president on, I think, on pretty much completely unrelated matters, got wrapped up and kicked out of office in an impeachment trial. This eventually leads to the election of a more leftist candidate and pro-peace candidate, Moon Jae-in, who was actually one of the cabinet members under the last time the Koreans and, the Korean people in general, and then also the Americans under the Clinton administration really got along. He was a big advocate of the Sunshine Policy, which basically opened up joint factories between North and South Korea. And I think there's a lot of families on the other opposite sides of the border. As Donald Trump said at the G7 conference, he called the DMZ an artificial barrier, which I thought was kind of a crazy thing to hear out of an American president, really acknowledging that, yeah, we just drew a line in the middle of this peninsula, and there's some people, in the same families on opposite sides of the line, and, so this allowed for visits. Moon Jae-in is a true believer in Korean peace. The Olympic Games, I think, was a big chance for, the Koreans to show unity and for both sides to show that they were interested in talks with each other, and doing so in sports where the stakes are relatively low, where most times if you have these negotiations that are surrounding nuclear weapons and, no side wants to start off by giving up a nuclear bomb or, conceding sanctions, to North Korea, even if they don't give up their nuclear weapons. And, Donald Trump has done a sufficient job in not wrecking the peace, which doesn't sound like a compliment, but, we're talking about American presidents here in, 2018. So it really is a compliment to say, Donald Trump has not wrecked the Korean peace process.
Yeah, so far it's definitely looking like a positive step. And that because, like you were saying, he said that DMZ is basically an artificial border. It was pretty much just put there. It's not an actual border because before it was, just one whole peninsula. So.
Right. Prior to 1953, the Koreans didn't organize themselves neatly on each side of the 38th parallel, line that literally no one could see, unless you're on like a Google Earth map. So, it really is. It's an artificial barrier, and I understand that it's been decades and decades, and yeah, now there's strategic positions built up on both sides of that artificial barrier, and I'm sure that South Koreans, due to the separation, have moved in different ways culturally. Obviously, the South Koreans are far richer than their North Korean relatives, and ethnic relations, but I mean, this is a good thing. And, there are a lot of Koreans who still believe in, Korean unification, which, Trump and Kim Jong-un really weren't talking about. And I think that's probably, 3 or 4, gigantic leaps away from where we are now. But, that's certainly something that I don't think would be a bad thing for Koreans to at least be able to freely travel all over the Korean peninsula.
Yeah, I think people have this notion that peace is just going to happen, with a snap, that's it, we're done. I mean, as much as it would be nice for that to happen, I don't think, that wouldn't really be really be a realistic thing.
Right. Well, and one of the big things here is that we're talking about is denuclearization. And John Bolton had advocated for Libyan-style denuclearization. But I explained on episode 197 on my show that when Libya denuclearized, they weren't giving up nuclear weapons. They were giving up technology that could be used to make nuclear weapons. It's not like the United States was rolling out Gaddafi's and nuclear bombs onto the decks of our aircraft carrier and then sailing them back to the United States. But that's what John Bolton made it sound like. North Korea has somewhere between most estimates 30 and 60 nuclear weapons, and some of those weapons possibly being hydrogen weapons, as well as having a very advanced long-range missile program that the United States also wants to get rid of. And so, you're talking about a logistical nightmare on top of everything else. Like, how are you going to send Americans into North Korea, go to where their nuclear bombs are, and then do the necessary procedures or witness the necessary procedures to feel confident that that weapon has been disarmed, and then to take that weapon and dispose of it in a way that the Americans feel it can never be rearmed again. And then, like I said, and Donald Trump even admitted this in his press conference that, I think he phrased it, American has intelligence agents everywhere, but one place where we don't have a lot of information is about North Korea. And so it's going to take a lot of trust on both sides of this issue that, it has to be built up as North Korea ships out their nuclear weapons and then the Americans receive them. And like I said, I think just on the logistical standpoint, and also I think a lot of Americans would have a problem if we're just bringing North Korean nuclear weapons and landing them somewhere in the middle of the United States. I think John Bolton wanted to put them in Tennessee. I don't think residents of that town are going to be like, oh boy, we're going to have Kim Jong-un's hydrogen bomb on display. I think their reaction is going to be, don't bring it here.
Yeah, because it could be set off and it's game over.
So I have a question. I was talking to my brother briefly about this, and he lives in Japan right now, and he said that the Japanese people are skeptical that this will even go through. They think that Kim Jong-un might not follow through with all the deal that happened recently. Do you guys, like both of you, do you think that this will actually play out the way that we think it will, or?
That's a good question. There's a history, obviously, to what North Korea, I guess, and South Korea and Japan. There's a lot of history there. So it was like Kyle was saying, there's this trust that needs to be built over time. It's not going to be, oh yeah, we trust you now because technically it's still a war, but they actually fought, and killed Americans and Koreans and all that. So. I get where he's coming from. I don't know if this is going to happen. I think it's okay to look at it. Maybe not like a skeptical, but kind of like, okay, I'm optimistic about this, but I do want to look at it at a realistic angle and say, oh yeah, it's going to happen 100%. Yeah, I'm good. But to not look at this particular summit as a positive step towards peace it's completely dumbfounded. I don't know why people look at it and think that this is a negative. Like, I don't understand. Oh, this is a win for Kim and Donald Trump's being played.
I don't get that either.
I'm like, what kind of a moron thinks that? Yeah, exactly.
The Japanese are more like, just like, I hope it happens, but like, we're not sure yet, like, until he does actually. Right, yeah,
exactly. Until it actually happens, then, that's great. Be, cautiously optimistic, but like I was saying, some of the people.
It's just the Americans are like.
Yeah, a lot of Americans in the mainstream media, or like anything to be anti-Trump. I get it. Don't like Trump. That's fine. But give him credit for something. Look, you may not like him with what he did in the Iran nuclear deal. Great. You may not like him with what he did when he launched those missile strikes in Syria. Great. Well, actually, technically, mainstream media were like fucking saying he was president actually when that happened. Yeah, he's a presidential. He's presidential material now because he launched those strikes. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, with this North Korea thing, they're just like, oh, did you see what they're eating? Did you see their menu?
Oh yeah.
That was something I saw. I see it. Don Lemon and the guests were complaining about the menu options that they had at their dinner. I'm like, that's what you're going to complain about. Okay. Anyway. What do you think?
Well, I guess starting with the Japan issue, I know there's like historical and going back like hundreds of years and stuff, like fighting between like Japan and the Korean Peninsula. So that may have something to do with it. The current leader of Japan, Abe, is a pretty big hawk. Japan has actually amended its constitution and deployed troops overseas to the Middle East for the first time since World War II, and so that he's definitely, like an American hawkish president. I would also imagine that something that's had an impact is that North Korea has often threatened to, use a nuclear weapon against Japan, in part because Japan's a U.S. ally, and that's our proxy force in the region. And we have an aircraft carrier stationed at Okinawa. And so, if North Korea is looking to use a nuclear deterrent, one of the ways they could do it is by saying that we'll nuke Seoul or we'll nuke Tokyo. And so I'm sure that, this is added to kind of the culture of fear type of thing we see in the United States and Japan. But the media reaction has been hysterical. I mean, I've seen more attention paid to Kim Jong-un's toilet than most other issues. You know what I mean? And they kept saying that Trump was going to get played by Kim Jong-un. And it was like, I'm sitting here really trying to figure out what Donald Trump could possibly give Kim Jong-un at this meeting that would be such a terrible thing. Right. I mean, most of these people don't even necessarily agree with Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign against North Korea in the first place. So what does it matter to them if they relieve sanctions? It's certainly not a super popular policy within South Korea either. So and China, the neighbors of North Korea. So, there's really no reason to just straight out oppose, sanctions relief being a terrible thing. But it's almost like they thought Kim Jong-un was going to sail home on an American aircraft carrier, claiming it for North Korea, that he somehow negotiated that away from Donald Trump. I mean, the Americans literally don't have anything to give the North Koreans. They can't give them South Korea. South Korea has their plenty advanced own military, and the North and South Koreans get along better than the Americans and the North Koreans do. So even if Donald Trump were to pick a fight, it's not like Kim Jong-un would immediately go home and look to attack South Korea, who, like I said, has their own very advanced military. And so I was sitting there and I kept saying, what is he going to give away? What is he going to give away? He's not going to give them, the deed to Hawaii. So what are they possibly so hysterical about? Now, I think the main criticism that actually had an argument to it was that this is some kind of propaganda stunt for Kim Jong-un. And by Trump meeting with him, this is going to give him some kind of legitimacy. Of course, this is after they spent the past 3 days bashing Trump for being an international buffoon and laughed by all respectable world leaders. But now apparently he has so much respect that meeting with Kim Jong-un, it gives Kim Jong-un the power to oppress all of his own people for the rest of history. And I don't really, I don't think it's a good argument, but that's the argument they have.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that they say is just, I don't know, it's pretty ridiculous. Like I was saying, if it's anti-Trump, they're going to say it, So if he, did do this and see it to fruition 100%, whether it's during his presidency or, 50% or whatever, give him credit, give the man credit, and give Moon of South Korea credit too, and even Kim Jong-un credit, for doing this. I mean, and me saying that, it's not like, I'm condoning everything he's doing to his own people.
At least they're talking though.
Yeah.
Instead of making war.
Right. Exactly. At least they're talking. Now, granted, obviously, there's a lot to be done. A lot. I mean, to be honest, I'd rather see the prison camps be liberated, or see, just the people be liberated instead of just, the nuclear weapons. Okay. Well, that's great, but what about the actual people suffering right now? Mm-hmm. In the camps. I see that. I see that sometimes. Well, we're talking about the nuclear weapons. What about the camps? And I'm like, yeah. What about that? Because the people, they live there. So I don't know.
Well, I guess, the first thing I would ask somebody who presented that argument is just show me a time that, putting sanctions on a regime caused them to, adopt United States humanitarian standards, and that, detente wouldn't better achieve that. I think if you start to break down the barriers between North and South Korea, and, like I said, Moon Jae-in likes this sunshine policy where people on each side of the border start to meet, the North Koreans will pretty quickly realize that they are vastly, impoverished compared to their South Korean relatives, and I'm sure that they're going to start asking a whole lot of questions to Kim Jong-un and that regime. And I've read some people, and Donald Trump has certainly hinted at in his press conference that there may be like some actual liberalization going on within North Korea as this peace process unfolds. Let's hold our breath and hope for that. But I think exposure to the high standard of Western living is probably the best way to combat the Kim Jong-un oppressive administration versus trying to sanction them and isolate them to the point where they're all starving to death. If you look at Kim Jong-un, he'll be the last one to starve, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's a leader, so he gets all the good stuff, I guess.
Yeah, and just to go to the point that this is somehow just Donald Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un is a victory for him. I really don't buy that. I don't know how much the North Korean people really care how much who Donald Trump is and what it means for him to meet with Kim Jong-un. But that state is so oppressive and totalitarian. It's not like they can't come up with propaganda to say that Kim Jong-un is meeting all kinds of important people. I'm sure that they're able to control the information flow enough that they could edit together a video of Donald Trump shaking hands with some other world leader, Photoshop Kim Jong-un in there, and make it look like Donald Trump shook his hand. And so I don't see that Kim Jong-un would spend all this time and start giving away his nuclear weapons just to get a handshake with Kim Jong-un. He's not like an American lobbyist who will pay $500,000 to get a photo with the president.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I've seen this argument too about what happened with Libya and Gaddafi and other leaders, where we Saddam Hussein too, where we supposedly liberate them, and then of course what happened to the leader is they get brutally murdered and all that stuff. Do you think there's any chance of that happening with North Korea?
Well, I can't say no, but I think there are some distinct differences between Iraq and Libya and then North Korea. The first being that North Korea actually has nuclear weapons. So I think, they're going into the negotiating table with a whole lot more chips than both Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein did. Also, North Korea borders China, and China, I think, has a substantial portion of their population really does care and see themselves as kind of like stewards of the North Korean state, and does not want to see U.S. interventionism in North Korea. And so having China saying no is an awfully strong deterrent to America going in there and messing stuff up. Having at least a sympathetic government to the North, not having war in on the Korean Peninsula like Moon Jae-in is something that will help to prevent the United States from carrying out regime change there. But the other thing is that if you look at Saddam Hussein in 2003, his army had been completely destroyed, and Gaddafi didn't have much of an army himself. North Korea will still maintain, I'm sure, their artillery positions. They have like 800 or so artillery tubes that are pointed at Seoul, which has a metropolis population of like 28 million or something like that, including 100,000 Americans, and there's 30,000 American troops stationed up near around the DMZ. And so even without their nuclear weapons, they still hold a pretty strong, just regular military deterrent.
Okay, yeah, that's yeah, because I was thinking about that, because I think that's always something that people should think about when this happens, because we've seen it done before, and of course with the wars in the Middle East, and how that's going, and us intervening there, or the U.S. military or the government or whatever intervening there. So I think that's always, like you're saying, an option, or something that shouldn't be, I guess, completely taken off, even though it's something that we don't want to happen, but that's kind of the bad reality, I guess, that we live in.
Right. And hopefully, North Korea could go through some kind of regime change, just a popular one where the people of North Korea pick a leadership that, they actually want. I mean, I suppose it's possible. I I haven't gone to North Korea and done any polling, that Kim Jong-un is somewhat popular in the country. But like I said, I would imagine once they realize how far in poverty that they live compared to, especially their neighbors in South Korea, they're not going to be very happy with the way that leadership has been running that country.
So what are some other reactions that you've seen that made you kind of just laugh and just be like, that's just ridiculous? Like, what's some of the craziest reactions have you seen?
Mostly, I think most of the crazy reactions have been the ones that we covered, either that this is going to legitimize Kim Jong-un, that this was going to somehow blow up in Donald Trump's face, which really didn't seem like it could happen. I think the media they take Donald Trump very seriously, especially when he says something stupid. So when he's like, I'm not going to prepare for this meeting at all. I've been training it for my whole life. I'll know within the first second if Kim Jong-un is serious. And to some extent, Donald Trump isn't completely making it up. There's been talks going on for, a month or so between the North Koreans and the Americans, including very high level talks, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And so Donald Trump had a very good idea of what the North Koreans said that they were willing to talk about. And Donald Trump was apparently happy with the concessions that they were willing to make. And so if Donald Trump showed up to the meeting and said, I expect complete denuclearization, and Kim Jong-un said, well, we're kind of talking about that, but we're kind of not, then Donald Trump would know pretty quickly that he's not being serious and leave the meeting. But of course, he says, I'll know within the first second. And everybody's like, oh my God, the orange buffoon is going to go to Singapore and destroy the whole town. Come on.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid. Like I was saying before, anything that sounds anti-Trump, they're going to say it. Going back to when they're complaining about the menu options, on CNN, or just.
I've seen people say like, "Oh, two fascists are planning world domination." I'm like, okay, that's the dumbest take I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Well, and the sad thing is it's not like there's not a shortage of things to criticize Donald Trump on, especially on the international stage. I mean, the show I recorded with Will, the first thing we talk about actually is Yemen, and that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are backing the Yemeni government, and they're about to attack a critical city that holds a port that allows most of the aid to enter into northern Yemen. And we're talking about potentially millions of babies being killed in a Yemeni genocide, and that Donald Trump's hands run red with the blood of Yemeni people. And I'm saying he's a war criminal and he's a terrible person, but because I say that, Korean peace is a good thing, I'm a Trump apologist, even though, I'm saying the worst thing, Donald Trump right now is one of the worst human beings on earth, up there with Mohammed bin Salman, who are just laying absolute devastation and waste to the people of Yemen. But that doesn't get as much criticism as does Kim Jong-un's jogging Secret Service team, or where he takes his most recent crap.
Well, also when they're when the Olympics was happening, they're talking about how beautiful his sister is and all that, and praising Kim and the family or whatever, acting like they're the first family or something like that. And then now they're talking about how how evil this guy is. Where was this when we were during the Olympics?
Like, pick a side.
Yeah, and then like we were saying too, there's plenty to be disappointed and angry with about Trump. Plenty to be.
They're always angry about him for the wrong reason.
Oh yeah, that's like the perfect way to put it. They get mad at him for the dumbest stuff. The dumb stuff.
And then the illegitimate stuff they just ignore. Like, nobody is talking about the war in Yemen, except for the libertarians.
Right.
Right. I thought the thing with Kim Jong-un's sister was really interesting because she's, sitting there and, Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, is sitting there, with a scowl on his face. And you do see the contrast where you have this like younger, attractive, nice Korean woman who looks like a decent person, and then meet old gay-hating Mike Pence sitting there, and then they pick the woman to glorify, in part because of the Trump derangement syndrome, when really she's heavily involved in the Korean regime that's responsible for having political prisoners, starvation, people living just very poor lives. They run a strict propaganda campaign. They have gulags and forced labor camps. Of course, Otto Wamir ended up dead somehow because of the North Koreans. And there's a lot to, complain about. And so, just because, you're sitting next to Hitler doesn't mean that you're a great person. And that's something that the mainstream media never seems to understand.
Yeah, another example of that too was just the instant reaction to what happened with Israel and Palestine, and what happened with like those protesters that were killed. Mm-hmm. And everyone was saying, it was Hamas, and I guess they were bought off or something like that. And,
both sides were saying that.
Yeah, and then people that are like pro-Israel or facts don't care about your feelings, whatever. But then once Israel happens, everything pro-Israel. I'm not even looking at Palestine. Fuck them. It's, I don't know. It's ridiculous, I think.
Right. When you look at the numbers and you see that there's 120 dead Palestinians, I think like 14,000 now injured, thousands by live fire, being hit by actual bullets. And then you see there's not a single injured Israeli soldier. You have to, wonder how they could possibly blame Hamas, but they do. They just say, but Hamas. Anytime you make an objection, but Hamas, the terrorist tunnels, they're fire bombs, they'll stab Jews.
I don't know if I'm wrong. I might be wrong on this, but wasn't Hamas created by Israel?
Yes and no. So there's an article, and maybe I could give it to you, or I'll post it on the YouTube video after this airs, because I can't remember it right now. But basically, the Israeli government, I think, cracked down on other groups that allowed for the rise of Hamas. And then basically they were propping up a completely like inept government that wasn't helping the people of Gaza at all. And so Hamas being kind of the only other option, kind of standing up and saying that, we'll defend and fight for you, was enough to, get Hamas elected. And also remember that Hamas was elected in 2006, and the majority of the population of Gaza is under 18 years old. And so, we're talking a 12-year-old election, and a good, majority of the, population wasn't even old enough to vote in it.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that whole situation is just really complicated. I'm not really.
It's hard to get like actual facts on it. Seems.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, I don't want to say pick a side. That sounds stupid. To pick a side,
I don't think it's really possible to pick a side.
I will say, I think one of the best comprehensive reviews I've seen of it, Mance Raider, who I think was a pretty recent guest on the show, Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast, had Jeremy Hammond on his show. I believe it's episode 85, and they do a 2.5 hours. So it's really long, but it's definitely worth it to sit there and listen to it. And you'll kind of understand how we got to where we are today. And then I recommend an episode of my show that I did with Will Porter titled Catastrophe Day. And I think that's episode 197. And on that episode, we kind of go through, what the Nakba is, and then what the modern protests are, the current protests, are over, and why the Palestinians are so upset. And hopefully that would give you a better context into what's going on.
Yeah,
it's a heavy topic that requires a lot of time to really understand.
Yeah, that's true, because it's we're saying it's a very complicated issue, and I don't know. I think maybe because U.S. and Israel are buddy. Mm-hmm. I guess it's hard. I guess it's almost impossible for them to, because with the Iran nuclear deal and Netanyahu conveniently having those, that presentation about oh, look at Iran, they're doing bad things, days before the deal's up. Mm-hmm. That's pretty convenient. And then, Netanyahu's been saying this for a long time, that Iran's going to have a bomb in 3 to 5 years. And then he does another press conference. They're almost getting the bomb, right?
Just a couple years.
And they had that stupid picture of a Looney Tunes bomb with the little, like, come on, man, like, really?
Right. And I mean, one of the reasons the Israel Palestine thing is so complicated is it's a 70-year-old conflict. And so if you have, conflict raging on for 70 years, there's going to be some pretty bad actors on both sides. I argue that if you look at kind of what's going on present day, the clear victims are the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, are basically locked into a gigantic open air prison with 2 million people, 80% being refugees. They're not allowed to import concrete or other like medical devices like wheelchairs. The Israelis kind of count their calories and limit the amount of food that's able to enter Gaza. And Hamas does terrible things. They carry out things that we consider terrorist attacks. They call for stabbings of just Jewish people living in Israel. They'll call for Palestinians to go and just stick a knife in their back, and that's absolutely a terrible, terrible thing. But remember, one side is at best armed with, like ropes and kites with, Molotov cocktails on it. And the other side is armed with F-35s and has, $3.6 billion of military aid from the United States every year. It's just not a fair fight.
Yeah, yeah. Every time I see that, they had Molotov cocktails, and that's it. That's what you got. They're gonna use a tire. They're gonna throw it at you. Yeah, well, I got this whole body shield and armor and stuff. And,
what about a tennis racket?
Oh yeah, the tennis racket. Yeah, that's
right. Yeah, these people have tennis rackets and they're hitting the tear gas canisters, back over the fence. And the other side, has sniper rifles with spotters sitting in like positions up on top of hills, and they have tanks and drones, and they're dropping the tear gas from drones now. And they also have like on a lot of the checkpoints to get out of Gaza, whenever they decide to actually let somebody out, they have automated weapons that are, kind of controlled remotely. And in fact, this is one of like Israel's big propaganda things, is that, this is like an all-female unit that controls it. And so this is, progress is, the way it's portrayed to the American audience, is that, look, we let women do our killing.
Mm. Yeah, it's supposed to be like progress that women are now killing people. Great. That makes me feel really good about my gender.
Equality.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was the thing that always cracked me up about Hillary Clinton. And there's like, I want to vote for her because she's a woman. It's like, oh, so you want a woman war criminal in charge of the whole thing? That will certainly make things better. You know what I mean? At least like if they like stood up for a woman like Jill Stein and, said like, oh, she represents our gender of peace, or, whatever like that. At least you're going after somebody with principles. But geez, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton had principles. I didn't know that.
Yeah, whoever will give her the most money.
Ain't that the truth? Donald Trump at one point, I think.
Right.
Giving her some money. Well, the Clinton family actually, he was giving her money, all that stuff. But I don't know. I mean,
can we cycle back to the North Korea thing? Because I think there were a couple other awesome results from that summit that I didn't get to yet. The first is, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un actually seem to like each other, and I think that's going to go a long way with Donald Trump. And also, Kim Jong-un is the supreme leader of North Korea, which means he doesn't have to go through regular elections. I guess it does mean that he has to maintain some level of popular support. I mean, if every single person in North Korea wants to kill him, eventually he's going to be out of power, but it doesn't, I don't think, he has to worry too much. And let's see, we had North Korea agreed to send back bodies of Americans killed during the Korean War. I thought this was a really positive one, not only because, it will, I'm sure, give some families closure who, never got the remains of their family member back. And, this wasn't so long ago that every single person, like, their spouse will have passed on. A lot of those spouses are still alive, and the children and the grandchildren. And so I think there's a really good opportunity for Americans to actually see some real positive impacts from these talks, in that, they'll bring these bodies home, they'll hold nice funerals in military, cemeteries, and this will be a good experience, a little bit propaganda, but at the same time, they'll be able to see real tangible results from the Trump Kim Jong-un talks. And from the North Korean standpoint, I mean, what's it going to cost them? A few $1,000 to send out some teams to go dig up some, bodies. that's not a huge cost, and I'm sure they could get like Americans or a third party to pay for something like this. They did sign, like, I guess I can't call it an agreement. They signed like a document basically saying that, you know, they agree that they want to continue talks to restart the relationship. I think North Korea is supposed to look at letting a lot of non-North Koreans out of their prisons. I think there's quite a few Japanese people that are held in the North Korean gulags there, and also to move towards denuclearization, which at the end of the day is hopefully what it takes to bring the end to calls from, you know, regime change from the American hawks. And, you know, we could finally agree, have some peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Trump in the press conference after said the United States would be ending their war games carried out in South Korea. A lot of these war games either simulate the like bombing and destruction of North Korea, at times using bombers that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, as well as our F-22 Raptors, which are stealth fighter planes and would likely be used in like a decapitation strike on Kim Jong-un. And they also, you know, take those 30,000 troops we have there and simulate the invasion of North Korea. And so this is something that's really caused North Korea a lot of anxiety over the years. And if you had noticed kind of the pattern, especially through the Obama years, was that every year when the U.S. carried out the war games, then North Korea would carry out some missile tests, and there would be like the exchange of threats during this time. And that's really when things got serious under the Trump administration, is when we started carrying out these big war games. And so I think that this kind of shows a understanding of Donald Trump, that, you know, he's going to have to make some concessions here. And he did a good job of spinning it to his base, saying that this is going to save us some money. Sorry, I've been going on for a while. Should I stop?
No, keep going.
No, keep going.
North Korea agreed to close down, at least this is according to Donald Trump. It wasn't signed in the document, but Donald Trump said he brought it up later. And that was North Korea is going to take down a missile engine test site. Donald Trump made it sound like that North Korea was unaware the Americans knew about the site. And then Donald Trump explained during the press conference that the heat signatures from the site that the Americans were able to obtain, probably from satellites, you know, and we knew about it. And Kim Jong-un then agreed to destroy it. Sounds like a good thing if it all went down that way. However, I will guarantee you guys in the next couple of days, we're going to start seeing some news articles coming up from, at the very least, like Salon and Raw's story, but probably from like the mainstream media types too, saying Donald Trump gave classified information to Kim Jong-un that we knew where this test site was. So expect that, but it's a good thing that the test site is going down. Trump did say in the press conference that sanctions will remain until denuclearization is reached. That we already knew this. You know, I guess I wish Donald Trump would show some good faith and, you know, just remove sanctions off of like 2 or 3 members of North Korea's ruling party, just to show like, hey, I'm willing to take those steps. But I'm guessing that we're not going to see that for a while. Trump did say that one day he would like to see the troops in South Korea return home, which I think is something we all want. Bring the troops home. Trump said that Kim agreed to a future meeting at the White House, but didn't, you know, kind of admitted that this was far off and probably wouldn't happen for a while. And, you know, but that does signal that there's going to be more talks to come. And it seemed to be a great thing overall. All the results seem generally positive as far as I could tell at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if he keeps the promise and actually bringing the troops home from South Korea, that'd be great. You know, because then that pretty much gives South Korea I guess they're kind of like baton and say, okay, now you can actually take care of your country instead of us having to do it for you, or, you know, or whatever you want to, however you want to spin it or whatever you want to say it is. But, you know, just be nice to have American troops, you know, focus on America, not another country that, you know, they don't even want to be at probably, you know, so that'd be a good thing.
Right. And as I pointed out before, South Korea has a military capable of defending its country. Now, I mean, I guess if Kim Jong-un launched nuclear weapons, that could be problematic. But the United States has sold South Korea some anti-missile battery systems. I think they have the THAAD missile systems deployed there. I'm sure if like it came down to being a huge sticking point for the South Koreans, the Americans would sell them some Patriot missiles, which are like kind of shorter range anti-missile systems. And if that's what it takes to relieve the South Korean sanctions, I'm not big on Lockheed Martin weapon sales, but if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do.
Yeah. What was your thoughts on seeing Dennis Rodman on CNN?
Well, I mean, I've always thought it was a good thing. One thing that Ron Paul always talks about and advocates for is using sports to break down these barriers. And Dennis Rodman going to North Korea was certainly one example of, sports being used to break down barriers. Rodman seemed to get along with both guys well. And so, I mean, if you have a mutual friend, why not use that mutual friend to help facilitate the talks? So I think it's a good thing. Now, I gotta admit that Dennis Rodman's a bit of a crank and seems to have a long-term substance abuse problem. And so it's not like I necessarily want this guy setting US policy, but if he wants to could help smooth things over between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, then, this is the guy it has to be. And it's likely not, because Dennis Rodman is any kind of special character or anything like that, but because, the people that wear suits and label themselves foreign policy experts and are, establishment lifelong bureaucrats in the State Department and different government administration officials all agree that you can't get along with Kim Jong-un, and they never opened up the opportunity for it. The fact that Dennis Rodman's kind of a interesting and odd guy is, what made him, the person that ends up going over there and meeting Kim Jong-un, not because Kim Jong-un necessarily picked the goofiest American to become friends with.
Yeah, so a lot of people are saying that, this is just a fantasy world, because I guess people are so used to seeing just, old men in suits, doing these diplomacy talks and all that. And now you're seeing Dennis Rodman and Donald Trump and Kim Kardashian, what she did, with the bringing Alice Johnson home. People that are actually talking to Donald Trump and actually making a difference in someone's life, and not just, saying stuff and then, I don't want to talk to Donald Trump. Okay, well, you're not getting anything done. Look what Kim did. Look what Dennis Rodman's doing and has been doing for years, getting, like he was saying on the interview, getting death threats and, pretty much being irrelevant because, oh, how dare you talk to him or whatever, so I don't know.
Right. I mean, it's a crazy thing we were talking about before, where if it takes Kim Kardashian shaking her ass in Donald Trump's face, and that's what it takes to get some poor old woman out of prison, then I'm not going to complain about that. You know what I mean? I think it was Adam Schiff on Twitter, who's that California representative that's all about Russiagate, was saying something about oh, this isn't a good thing. And it's like, how many people have you gotten pardoned? Right? Let's be honest here. This is a good thing. The same with the protesting athletes. If Trump is actually going to take their protests and start pardoning people to try to appease them, then Obama said a whole lot of nice things and he did pardon some people, but not in reaction to those protests. And so I think this is a kind of a good streak we're seeing in Trump. And there's a lot of people who are unjustly in prison. And I think if Trump starts to, be presented with these cases, then we could see a lot of people getting out who, made some mistakes when they were, 18, 21 years old. They got busted with, selling drugs a couple times. And now they're doing literally life, 65, 70 years they're going to spend in a federal prison.
Yeah, and Trump said to those athletes that were protesting, give me a list of people you like to see, at least me look at the case, whatever, or my team or whoever, But they're not going to do that, because is that really what they're protesting? Because who knows that, right now? So Donald Trump basically tells the athletes, okay, well, if you give me at least, I don't know, give me some names, just give me some names. And I'll have whoever, my criminal justice team, whoever, to look at the case, and then we'll go from there. What's the harm in that? But no, they won't do that because Donald Trump's an evil person and we don't talk to him, whatever. Well, nothing's gonna happen then, and we're gonna blame you for it.
Yeah, And I mean, I hope they do give him a list. Now, I understand if they say, hey, we got a lot of other problems, starting with police brutality, and Donald Trump continues to glorify the police. And that's a real problem for us. You don't have to stop protesting, but at the very least, take the guy up on his offer and get some poor guys out of prison, or poor girls out of prison who are going to just continue to spend their lives rotting away in there for no reason, just because, you know, they had some substances that were illegal.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too that Jeff Sessions has kind of been pushed aside, you know, because with all the him bringing having the states decide on marijuana laws and all that stuff, which is good, you know, not just having to be a federal, you know, or having Jeff Sessions be the all, you know, end all be all, which we all know what would happen if Jeff Sessions had the end all be all decision in terms of, you know, marijuana and drug offenses. He just put them all in jail, or probably just kill them all, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, Jeff Sessions is a terrible person and one of the worst Trump appointments to date. As much as I, you know, really stood up against Pompeo and Gina Haspel recently, Sessions may be turning out to be the absolute worst. So hopefully, you know, Trump eventually gets tired of him and kicks him out of power. I think one of the problems here is that he actually has quite a bit of support in the Senate, being a former senator, so he's buddy-buddy with all of those guys, but also that he stood aside on the Russiagate scenario, I think has him with some Democratic sympathies. So Trump might find himself in a little bit of a political situation if you remove Sessions, but hopefully these recent like edicts on the immigration stuff is enough to turn the Democratic consensus against Sessions, and if Trump does decide to fire him, he could do so, and hopefully that happens sooner rather than later, man, because you know, the drug war stuff is terrible, the immigration stuff is terrible, the amount that guy loves police is unbelievable. He loves the cops, man.
Yeah, he like you were saying, he definitely glorifies them to no end. But someone in the chat asked a good question, actually. Says we're talking about the worst appointment. Who do you think is the best appointment that Trump has in his administration?
Probably in this, I'm trying to think. I mean, like, I think like Mick Mulvaney is the Office of Budget Management, and this is a, you know, kind of a lower position. So if you're looking at like cabinet members and people who are always talked about being around Trump, it's not a very high standard, but it's probably General Mattis. He was one of the more reasonable voices in the room on the bombing Syria issue when John Bolton was really pushing for a large attack against the Assad government. Mattis was, from all the things that I read, a large voice in kind of shouting that down. Mattis hasn't been terrible on the Iran nuclear deal. He hasn't really broken with President Trump a lot and said like, oh, we should have kept the deal or something like that. But when it was in place, he was, you know, kind of saying that this is the best we have right now. So
it sounded like he was probably overruled on that. Like he, you know, everyone else was like, yes. And he's like, oh, I guess I can't win this one.
Right. And I mean, like, other people within Trump's campaign has certainly had their better moments and their worst moments. There were times where H.R. McMaster, who was the former national security advisor, didn't want to escalate quite so much. And I guess there were times where he was like presenting Trump with options on Afghanistan and wouldn't give Trump, you know, an option that kind of led to and you know, portrayed an easy path of victory. And I thought that was a good thing that, you know, he was at least honest, saying like, hey, there's really not like a good path ahead here, or at least not presenting Trump with an option, you know, in rose-colored glasses like a John Bolton would. Tillerson was good on things from time to time. It was certainly less hawkish on North Korea last year when Donald Trump was yelling about fire and fury. But there's nobody who you would point to and be like, oh, that's, you know, libertarian man, Ron Paul. Boy, thank God we have him in the administration. So,
yeah, if only if right, if only if Ron Paul had been president, or I guess to a lesser extent Rand Paul too.
Right, Rand's not bad on the issues. I mean, at the very least, I think he's probably winding down the wars overseas rather than ramping them up. We're probably not supporting Saudi Arabia quite so much. I think he would probably be a much more enthusiastic negotiating partner with Kim Jong-un over Donald Trump. Although it's probably in part Donald Trump's like grandiose thoughts of himself that make him so confident and, willing to go against the entire media saying, this isn't a good idea. Not that Rand doesn't have a backbone, but that Donald Trump has an awful lot of confidence, and that makes a big difference when you're doing things that are politically unpopular and far, far against the establishment.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting to think of who would come after Donald Trump, if he does get another election or another term, which from his approval ratings and from some of the things he's been doing in terms of the Korea, at least now, recent memory, it seems like, but obviously it's still kind of far off. But I wanted to ask, we'll have to end it here in a little bit. I wanted to ask you a final question. Where do you see, do you think there's has there been any indication of any changes in terms of what he's going to do with the Middle East? Because it doesn't really seem like it's just going to be more of the same, more of Obama's wars and more of Bush and all that in terms of the Middle East.
So I don't see anything that would make me say that, except this one thing, and that is Donald Trump does seem to be, pretty straight populist, and where people cheer, he goes and supports. And so if if the Republicans end up doing very well in the midterm elections, and a big part of that is Donald Trump's peace push with North Korea, and maybe, come November, they're looking to get like an official treaty or some kind of deal done with North Korea, and Donald Trump needs approval from the Senate to do so. This could be something that Donald Trump uses as a weapon for the Republican Party. I mean, Moon Jae-in, one of the things that made me convinced that the South Korean president really believed and really wanted peace was that he was saying Donald Trump should win the Peace Prize, which Donald Trump isn't the leader of the peace push there. Moon Jae-in knows that, but I think he also knows that Donald Trump is the type of guy to buy into something because he's offered a shiny medal at the end. And so if you really incentivize Donald Trump and make him think that, hey, peace is really powerful. Man, I just saw this quote. It was actually from Donald Trump during the press conference. He says something like, it's easy to make war, but only the most courageous men are able to make peace, or something along those lines, saying it about himself, of course. But this is kind of, the persona that Donald Trump presents himself as, is that, he's actually now going to be the guy that goes around the world making peace. And maybe that's what he does, just because that's what gets him the most cheering and applause. And if that's the case, then I'm more than willing to applaud for peace, even if it's to, like we said before, the orange buffoon.
Yeah. Orange buffoon, yeah. Or a Cheeto, or I don't know. Any of the other nicknames that they gave him, I don't even know. But yeah, I want to thank Kyle for joining us for talking about North Korea mostly, and
on such short notice too.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. And also talking about some other foreign policy stuff.
Yeah, no problem. I had a great time. I've been watching the show quite often. I know you had Pat McFarlane and Daniel Elwood on. Those are, two good friends of mine with the Libertarian Union, which you check out on Facebook. And the episodes with Will is a very good friend of mine. We talk all the time. So I watch his, and you had Mance on recently, and Scott Horton on, and Eric July. I mean, you guys are getting awesome guests, and you got an awesome show. So I'm glad to, add my name to that list.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you back on. And yeah, we're always striving to have good guests and have people that know more things than us, because I'm always, we're always willing to learn about these type of things. So yeah, again, thanks, Kyle, for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, have a good night, everybody.